as Mark mentioned, sometimes we have these panel meetings, and I was at one about funding, and someone in the audience said, this is all interesting about how do you raise funds, but what I really want to know is how do I break into America? So there's the question. If you're asking this question, you're actually asking the wrong question. It's the wrong question, because America is an ideal. America is what you hear in from the sea to shining sea. It's what you hear in politics. But the US is a place. The US is an economy. So here is your mission impossible, is breaking into the US. So we start off with the right terminology, the American terminology. And so if you do this right, it is potentially your path to global dominance as well, and we'll see why. First of all, why should I know anything about this? Well, I mean, Mark gave my background, but I was born and bred in the USA, and I was right there pretty much at the beginning of the enterprise software market. At the time that I started building software, I don't even know what the largest software company in the world was. It's probably IBM. But when I started my career in 1981, the largest company was only about $200 million in revenue. And so it's grown very rapidly over that time. And I have started 2 different companies, and that's how I want to give back, as I am an entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur. Not always successful, but it's been successful enough that I don't really need to worry about anything anymore. Also, I've hired hundreds of people, both here in the UK, in the US, in the EU, and maybe in the thousands. I'm not quite sure. I've also raised a lot of money, over $75 million in money from venture capitalists. And I didn't want to raise any more than that. And I've done business in over 60 countries now, including doing some sales roles. I'm not a salesman, first of all, I'm very technical, but I do a lot of marketing, and I also do a lot of consulting as well. And I've also been a member of multiple boards and different industries. And of course, I'm also a freeman as well, and a newly freeman. So anyway, so your mission, should you choose to accept it, is, first of all, you gotta wanna do this. But on top of that, it's like X Factor. Why are you gonna win? Because I really want this. There's way too many people who go into the US thinking, I really want this, so I will be successful. Well, first of all, you gotta have a well-run business. Maybe you will have a well-run business in the future, but don't even start thinking about this unless you have a well-run business. You should also have a clear competitive advantage as well. And your core competence is exceptional. That's how you win customers. That's how you're providing greater value to the customers. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I'm going to assume that you know how to do that. But you have analysts seeking your advice, so that's a clear sign that maybe you're ready to go. You're a leader either in the UK or the European market, UK plus EU now. You're looking for new markets to open up, and you may or may not be profitable. That's not necessarily a barrier to opening up in the US. In fact, many companies are not profitable before they start shifting over to the US market. And you should have considered going into the US market by now, which I assume if you're here, you've probably considered it at some point. And most of all, you're up for the challenge. That's incredibly important. You must be motivated to be able to do that. Maybe not today, but perhaps in the future. Okay, so if you accept the challenge, so then your mission is going to be to successfully enter the US and gain meaningful market share. Meaningful market share could ultimately mean billions of dollars if you're in the right industry with the right product in the right place. But it could mean millions of dollars, but the end result could be very profitable. Also, as part of this presentation, You'll be able to understand the size and significance of the opportunity. You'll be able to identify a starting point for that growth and market share. You can start to look for a plan for using your core competencies and positioning into winning customers in the US market. Also, you may consider securing the funding needed for such a major operation. And then you also need to hire the right people, the right team for the mission in the right place. And then finally, to understand the threats that you're going to be dealing with. What are the challenges? What are the obstacles to actually getting into the US? So first of all, the US is absolutely enormous. You know, it's just big. You know, it's like, until you've actually driven across the United States, you never really understand how big the United States actually is. But you know, it's probably one of the strongest markets, the strongest economies in the world right now. Somehow it is bucking the trend and starting to move forward where other economies are not. It just has the strength, diversity, resilience that is why it constantly creates new opportunities, both internally, but also for people coming in as well. It's also got the incentives. I can tell you, you can become wealthy by going into the US and making a lot of money in the US. And it is possible. I know it's possible to do. Then, you know, but it is going to be very different. You know, so first of all, I'm going to declare my background is entirely B2B. If you have a consumer opportunity, well, hopefully you can learn something from this. But I'm going to be doing this entirely from a B2B perspective. But things like consumers, you know, we're going to look at how do they buy products, both as a business buyer as well as consumer buyer. And then talk a little bit about some of the market barriers as well, such as tariffs, taxes, compliance requirements. And then domestic versus international trade. The US, well, we'll get into the size of the US economy overall, but a lot of it's internal, but that doesn't mean that that's not open to you, this huge market opportunity that's available here. So just for scale, you know, the population is 331 million compared to 67 million in the UK. It's kind of hard to imagine that, but it's a very diverse economy or population as well. I lived in Hawaii for a while, where I was actually a minority, and it was such a jumble of different nationality, you know, people of descent from different nationalities, but California as well, you know, a huge Latino community, as well as African American community in California. The economy as well is huge. It's enormous, $26.7 trillion compared to only 3.6. Notice that I tried to level out those scales, and you can see that the economy is bigger in the US than it is in the UK. That's especially true for the domestic economy as well. The landmass is about 40 times larger. Now, part of that is because of Alaska. They always kind of put Alaska in the corner there. Don't worry about it because there's not a lot up there. I haven't even been to Alaska yet. I'm planning to go next year, but that'll be fun. But if you were to stretch Alaska, it would go all the way from Los Angeles over to Augusta, Georgia. That's how enormous Alaska is. I think Hawaii is about to scale. So just so big, like where do you start? You know, it's like, see all those airports there? There are 10 times as many major airports in the US as there are in the UK. Something else to consider, you may have seen a map like this, especially very lately. These states behave differently. they vote differently. And as we know, there's a huge um, uh, just polarization that's happening in the country right now. But my experience as well, my background is in open source. Only the blue states buy open source, but many different categories, you will find that only the blue states will buy your product compared to the red states, which have more of a tendency to buy domestic products. So it's kind of interesting. It's not impossible to do that, but the blue states tend to be more outward looking, more internationalist, and the red states tend to be nationalist. And we see that on display. There's different regulations for every single state as well. That is the nature of the Constitution, is that each state gets to regulate whatever happens within its borders. Anything that happens between borders is controlled by the federal government. So a lot of trade is regulated by the federal government. But you have to take into account that when you go into these states, it's going to be different. It actually can drive bizarre behavior. Like Amazon will not do anything in Chicago, or sorry, in the state of Illinois, because, and I got this from AWS, they don't want to be there because all of a sudden there's this tax implication because the state can be able to do things like that. I may have gotten that wrong, but the implications can be very large, and there can be a lot of traps that are available as a result of that as well. So it's just still more diversity, but we're starting to narrow down where you might want to enter. The other thing about the blue states is they're blue because they have a lot of cities as well. And that will play a really important part as well. Now, in terms of, I'm just going to move. I hope I don't screw something up because I can't see my own presentation. I'll have to look over here. Okay, yeah. So anyway, what have you got to sell? Well, I hope you know what you're selling. I hope you have an excellent elevator pitch, not lift pitch, and that you know how to present to a customer here in the UK or in Europe. But you should be able to identify your company's unique value proposition, and also be able to align with the market as well. You should be able to match your competencies with US market demands and product fit. Now, your product may not be quite ready to go into the US market, and that's something that you will have to do in terms of research. And an example is just really simple, but the language in your documentation, in your product manuals or whatever, it better be in US English. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And so, no U's, before the R, it's just OR on a lot of words. And there's a bunch of words that simply do not exist in American English. Also, you should have a clear differentiation strategy, which by and large is probably going to work within the US as well. It depends on whether you're aware of the competitors in the US. But, if you've got a strong product, strong differentiation, that'll probably work over there as well. And then you should just make sure you have your happy customers, because those are going to be your ambassadors. They will help you. Your happy customers actually want to see you succeed. And they're going to have their counterparts over in the US. So these are part of your secret weapons as well. Your success stories. A lot of your success stories will translate from over here to over there, but only under certain circumstances. And then you should apply your planning abilities as well. Have well-structured, well-focused business plan. Don't go in with a wish and a prayer. Nick used to tell me about the story of, going into, when Ingress went into Europe, and it's like, well, how much do you want? Or what's my budget? Well, how much do you want? Well, that's not going to work. Usually is have a budget allocated, know how much you want to spend, but be prepared and know how much it's going to cost to go in. And then allocate your resources wisely, but don't be too conservative either. Now, where do you go? Where do you start? I remember that was part of that conversation about how do I break into the US? What, do I just go to New York? Do I go to San Francisco? Do I go to Atlanta? Do I go to Boston? I mean, the place is enormous. How do I start? And unfortunately, a lot of times it starts with, well, I know a guy, and I start to build an entire organization around the guy. Well, that happened to us at Alfresco, and I knew that that wasn't going to work. I was not CEO at Alfresco. I was chairman and CTO. The CEO said, it'll be fine. So he came from Business Objects, and he brought on a guy who was a VP of sales from Business Objects, big organization. But he happened to live in Atlanta. And that was one of the red states. That's one problem. But also, it was just not the right place. That's not where our customers were. So it highlights a concept known as clusters. Has anybody heard of clusters before? Okay. Yeah, it was the idea came from Michael Porter back in 1998. And in fact, it probably came from a little bit earlier than that, but it's just a geographic concentration of interconnected companies and institutions in a particular field, meaning industry. So you think of Silicon Valley for tech, Detroit for automotive, or Wall Street for finance. And it's a place of critical mass. Clusters, if you look at his historical view on clusters, goes back to Italy when the silk trade came into Lake Como that helped develop Milan as an example. And you started not just getting a lot of merchants, but you started getting the manufacturing facilities, you started getting the new banking industry, the new lawyer industry. You started to create an ecosystem of all the types of people and resources and ecosystems that are required in order to be able to build up an entire industry. That concept is bigger than ever. I actually got to meet Michael Porter, and that was such a thrill to be able to meet him. And I discussed it with him. I said, with the internet now, that must be breaking down this notion of clusters. And I thought, wow, I'm gonna be brilliant. And he's going, yes, John, you're exactly right. Well, no, he didn't. He goes, you know, you'd think of that, wouldn't you? But our evidence shows the exact opposite, is that clusters are getting stronger. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't create new clusters, but the internet is reinforcing this notion of clusters. And I don't know why. I didn't have enough time to ask him that, but it's a place to build critical mass. And what is probably the most important lesson, if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, is that when you're selling to another customer, there are 3 dimensions of referenceability. 3: geography, job, and industry. And when you get at least 2 of those together, you have an extremely strong reference network that you can create. Because if I'm in the same industry and I have the same job, even if that person that you're talking to is on another continent, they will listen to your story. You are building credibility with that other person. You can be in an industry and a geography in the same place, which is why you often see the most successful sales teams actually with that combination. Or you can have the same type of job, like selling to HR, or selling to manufacturing, or selling to operations, or selling to sales organizations for things like Salesforce, or selling to HR with something like Workday. Then what you can do is start to look at where all the clusters are. You know, just start to look at where might your cluster be. You know what your cluster is here in the UK, or you should be able to take and reflect on that. Where am I selling? Who are my customers? Where are they located? How close are they to one another? How referenceable are they to other customers as well? And then, of course, you got your sources of, the industry research, newsletters, analysts, connections. Use your LinkedIn network to be able to find out. Use ChatGPT. It knows a lot, a surprising amount about your own industry because it knows the entire internet as well. So let's just take a look as well in terms of, let's look at these clusters here. I've highlighted some of the largest clusters because of just how valuable they are. Silicon Valley, in terms of revenue, is $1 trillion in revenue each year. Wall Street is $1 trillion each year. I mean, that's just amazing, incredible to think about. And those are pure concentrated clusters. You have more diverse clusters, such as Boston with biotech and some technology. You have Seattle with aerospace and technology. You have Atlanta with logistics and media. Chicago is all over the place, but that's where the Mercantile Exchange is. And so there's a lot around finance and trading around there, lawyers, a lot of transportation, logistics, all sorts of stuff here. But you know what your industry is. You know where your competitors are. You know where your customers' US headquarters are. That's where you go. And not only that, I remember there's a company that competed with Salesforce. It's called Sugar CRM. And the founder of Sugar CRM came to talk to us and seek advice on how to set up a European headquarters. And unfortunately, he didn't listen to us. He heard about these great tax breaks if he goes into Ireland. And I said, no, you don't want to do that. You want to go to Egham, because every single CRM company or sales automation company came out of Egham. So you can hire a VP, you can hire all the marketing people you need, you can get to the analysts, everybody. If you just go to Egham, and it's real close to Heathrow too. Yeah, but the tax breaks in Ireland are so great. Well, that's just a bad move. And you will see there's states and cities that are trying to create clusters by giving out a lot of money. In fact, one that successfully actually did that was Austin, Texas. They had the University of Texas and said, God damn it, we can be as big as Silicon Valley. And so they're trying, and they're doing a pretty good job, and they're cutting regulation to get guys like Elon Musk to go over over to Texas at least, but also there, Larry Ellison, going to Texas. So you can do it, but these clusters have been established sometimes for over 200 years, at least 100 years in most cases. So leverage that. You're not going to break the mold. Don't try to break the mold, try to break the competition instead. Do it with your product, not with your location.
So just a question then, sorry.
Yes,
You're saying you can look at the industry clusters, right? So is that the cluster of the market that's building the same sort of product, or where your customers are? Because your customers might be different.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But sometimes they are one and the same. That the cluster is selling to the customers, so I don't know what your businesses are, but you could have, let's say you're a lawyer for high-tech companies and you want to start a law firm, or you want to take and extend your law firm over there. You go to where other high-tech companies are. In all probability, if there are competitors that already exist there, they exist because the customers are going to be near there. It's not, it's a fine-tuned balance there, but at a first glance, just looking at how close a connection, I mean, you think about Wall Street in the city of London or Canary Wharf, it's almost like there's a tube line that goes between those two that takes about 8 hours to get from one to the other. But there's such a free flow of people between those that is a clear interconnected cluster. So I still look at where your competitors are. And that's probably where your customers are going to be. But perhaps you're breaking into a new industry. Then look at the adjacent industries, because usually industries fork out of other industries as well. You'll still want to be near where the clusters are, because it's going to be your advisors too that are going to be helpful. And what you want to do is steal the people from your competitors as well, and they're going to be there. So that's my advice here. By the way, I didn't mention at the beginning, but I will give instructions on how to get the presentation at the end as well. Or maybe it's now on the WCIT account, so maybe you can just get it from them. But I'll give you more details later. So as you go into these, leverage those UK references. So when we started at Documentum, we had a very focused plan around pharmaceuticals. And we got our first pharmaceutical customers in the US. The pharmaceutical customers were generally, well, we got our first one where we started, which was the Bay Area. The Bay Area, and that was Genentech, and it was probably one of the very first ones that came up. So it wasn't a big cluster of biotech yet. It was going to be. But we ended up opening offices, kind of breaking into new territory in the Philadelphia area. That was ground zero for pharmaceuticals. And that's where all the salespeople of DEC were. And the number one computer seller to pharmaceuticals was Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC. So we started hiring a lot of people from DEC, and we started getting a lot of sales. So we built up a portfolio of somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen customers. And that was enough for us to go to Basel, Switzerland, and also to Macclesfield, where Zeneca was, and which is now AstraZeneca, and to go to a number of different pharmaceutical sites across Europe. And we broke into those by using those clusters and connections. And by the way, in the process, hiring competitors, salespeople to help us sell. We hired our competitors' consultants. We hired our competitors' marketing people. And yeah, we brought in people from other industries as well. But you want this head start. You want the unfair advantage going in there. Your product should be your unfair advantage, and your differentiation against the competitors is also an important part, and it's what helps bring over your competitors' people as well. Now, this is also an important view, and I think it's going to be too small here. These are the three major airline networks, international airline networks, because I could add Southwest in there. Southwest does not fly to the UK, so I don't think you'll get frequent flyer points. And every day, every time I fly, I think, God, it's like British Airways has me by the throat here. But One World Alliance, I got to go with One World Alliance. It ends up defining where we go to sell often, because you want to get from Heathrow usually to get to wherever it is you're going. I have found some of the most successful software people, they're in United, because United is a hub in San Francisco. And this is all the places that United sells. And by the way, these are huge manufacturing centers. So if you overlay those clusters on top of the airline networks, they don't all match up. Now, we set up this headquarters in Atlanta, and unfortunately, Atlanta doesn't go to where the customers were. They don't go to as many blue states as they do red states, probably because they start off in a red state. And that's not a political statement. It's just a statement of fact that it didn't fit our cluster. And so anyway, how many people are British Airways? Any United, Lufthansa, okay. Any Delta or Virgin Atlantic? Is that your main airlines? Anyway, it's not the most convenient, but you're not bad off with one world, but this is your interconnecting network into your multiple clusters and to your other potential other commercial bases. So I've just come up with a list of the biggest industries and clusters in the US. Professional services and business services is number one, $3.5 trillion. That means that professional services is as big as the entire UK economy. I mean, that's just amazing. Real estate, I don't think anybody here is in real estate or is trying to sell real estate in the US. So that's pretty place specific, but manufacturing, that crosses over. And, you know, if you're creating product for manufacturers or if you are a manufacturer yourself, educational services, healthcare, pretty darn big and growing, finance and insurance, a lot of interesting, I've done a lot of business in finance and insurance, and if you don't have a cluster yet, that's always my first go-to for that. Anyway, you can see the list, you can see the cities. That is your target list for where do you start off and where you're going to target for each of these. And by the way, feel free to ask questions if something is not clear or whatever. I just threw in this time zone map, and I hope the colors are clear from the presentation here. There are, I know from by the physical abuse on my body, how many time zones there are between the UK and all the rest of those. And it does create its own challenges as well. We intentionally, when we started Alfresco, did not want to go through the 8-hour time zone shift of California. California is a great place to be for software. It's a great place to have, no matter what software you have, it's a great place to be. But you can also be near your customers as well. So New York is not a bad place to start for many industries if you looked at that previous one. That's only 5 hours difference. The really hard part is when you, perhaps here as the CEO, having your board calls or your meetings or whatever with California, time zones mean that there's only a window of about an hour or 2 hours, unless you want to stay up until midnight, which happens a lot. It's no fun. And on the other side, you get people. I'm on a board that we had a board meeting yesterday, and the CEO is in Portland, or near Portland, Oregon. She gets up at 6 o'clock every day. I'm not a morning person, so I just don't like doing stuff like that. And then, you know, the hell of trying to coordinate a worldwide call with India, China, US, UK, oh boy. Okay, now that question came out of the board panel on funding and financing. This can be a really important lever for breaking into the US. And it's not just about the money. There is all sorts of funding. There's a lot of cash that is waiting to be invested right now. And a lot of firms looking for companies that are primed and ready to expand into other geographies. So it's what VCs do. You know, they come in and say, yeah, you've got a great product and you have a great opportunity in the US. It's also what private equity firms do as well. Private equity firms will actually go and find companies where they think the expansion opportunity is going to be much bigger, much broader. And so they're investing in more mature companies with the opportunity of expanding out. I was just in a private equity deal a couple of weeks ago where it closed and it was successful, presenting to a European company the opportunity to expand in the US. So what these firms bring is they bring money, but they also bring networks. They bring expertise. They bring experts. And you want the best ones. So the best ones are US oriented. So the US firms coming over, you have some some that are in both places. And, we got money from Axel, US firm that opened up European offices, great firm, and an incredible network of people. And they also help sort of fundraising as well. So if you want to get this money, make sure that you got your, all your bits down in terms of why you're such a great company, and the short, sweet presentation. This is not the one to go into how you do fundraising, but if you have more than 20 slides, you've got way too many, and that's probably twice too many. You want your value proposition to be super clear, and the value proposition for the funder as well. There's also incubators and things like that. I don't really know them that well, but there's probably opportunities in there as well. And then you want to be hiring the right operatives to assemble your team to get ready. And again, it's not some guy you start with the cluster and then you find somebody. If you know someone, that's great. If you know someone who knows someone, that's great also, but it's probably not going to happen. Now, when you're going in there, headhunters are going to be absolutely essential to be able to find the right person. Well, why do you need this person? Why can't I just send my right-hand man or woman to go off and do this? Why can't I go over there and do this? Well, it has to do with the cultural differences that exist. And you need a local. It could be a Brit who's been there for a very long time and has built up the relationships and the ecosystem, whatever. But you should be hiring the right US person. And if you have the competitive product and you have a big market opportunity, they will come to you often. But you might have to seek them out as well. So hire from the clusters, not from your mates. And I just heard this yesterday. It's opportunistic things of how do you break into a particular market. Oh, this guy just kind of popped up. Well, was it the right guy at the right place? It's probably the right guy, but the wrong place. And that just doesn't really work. So you yourself should be prepared. If you were the company leader, you should be prepared to go over there a lot. That market is 7 times bigger than your home market. It's worth it. It will probably become your dominant market. Look at SAP. Started off 20 years in Germany, and all of a sudden it's like boom. It's like, where did that come from? And now it's a very much US company as opposed to German company. So, this is one that really worries people as well. There are the all the cultural differences. That how you communicate is very different. I believe that when I'm communicating with people, I actually feel a certain level of Britishness. I've been here for 29 years now, so I got to undo all that. And sometimes it does come out. Sometimes the American side comes out, sometimes the British side comes out. But the communication is direct, informal. It tends to be more jovial as well. I don't know. I just seen people laugh more when I'm in an American meeting than I do over here. I don't know. And this is one that I learned from a YouTube that my son sent, because he's pretty much a Brit living in the US right now. And it's this notion of giving face. You've heard of saving face, right? How do I save face in this situation? Well, Americans will actually give face to recognize a situation where the other person needs to save face, and they will actually give it to you. It's a very different communication style, and it's not obvious, and it's not easily learned either. And it's so fundamental, it's really hard to describe what's going on, but it's very different. But one thing you can't do is the opposite, which is sarcasm. Most Americans hate sarcasm. It's not funny. The biggest arguments my wife and I, who's British, have ever had to do with her being sarcastic. So avoid sarcasm. But you have a huge advantage. A British accent in the US automatically adds 10 perceived IQ points. You know, I'd love to have an extra 10 IQ points, but I just cannot get rid of this accent. But it's a real advantage. They'll think you're smarter than you actually are. So take it for what it's worth. Negotiation tactics are going to be different. There have been studies done in terms of like venture capital scenarios, investment scenarios, and stuff like that done at business schools of American teams competing with British teams. The British teams just do not take the same level of risk as the US teams. And 5 times out of 6, the US teams win when they play through long-term scenarios. And just realize your counterparty is thinking that way as well. They're willing to take a risk, which can be in your advantage. They're taking a risk to buy into you. You're not American. It's not an American product, but it can also go the other way. They can outmaneuver you with this risk taking. And sometimes they'll steal your money with a smile on their face, but more often than not, they'll be fair. And business etiquette, well, Gary, I thought about dressing the way I would dress in the US. I never wear suits anymore. It's like all my life I've worn jeans. Back in the 80s, I walked into the office at Ingress, and I just decided to dress the way I dressed in California. I wasn't too bad. I don't think I was even wearing jeans, but I was dressed down. It wasn't even they didn't have dress down Fridays in those days. The next day, Nick goes, "My, you're looking very sartorial today." And that's the way the 80s were. But, it was never like that in California. My dad was at the Pentagon. He had to dress down when he went to California. So the decision-making process tends to be faster as well. There's different ways that you build trust in the US than others. And most of all, in terms of building trust, avoid any sort of passive aggression. Passive aggressiveness seems to be more of a trait of the British than it is of Americans. It does exist in both places. I don't want to overgeneralize this, but it tends to not go down very well. Manners, yes, they actually do have some manners. But basically, just deal with the flow. Just kind of deal with it, and they'll be polite in their own special way. Don't prejudge that perhaps some faux pas of how they just took something for themselves or handed over and reached over. They're not trying to be rude. It's just the way things are. Anyway, you will probably fail at this at some point. But failure in the US is acceptable. You don't fail, you don't learn. So, just give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? Okay. Just a brief word on litigation. If you're being litigated, I know this came up as a concern, litigation. It's the US culture, legal culture, started with Perry Mason back in all these lawyer shows in the 60s. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a lawyer and make lots of money. Well, if you're being litigated against, that's a first-class problem because you're now big enough to care. The answer, get a lawyer. It's as simple as that. Get a lawyer up front and you can avoid those problems because you will need some advisors. Don't try to go into this and just try and save money. Up front, just understand the value of that expertise. Some of the key advisors you're going to need are a corporate lawyer, an immigration lawyer, a tax advisor. So if you want anybody to come over to the US and you don't want them stopped, by the Border Patrol, then, you need to have those in place. Tax advisor, incredibly important. HR consultant, just to deal with the, intricacies of not just federal law, but of state and local law as well. Marketing specialists, industry analysts, you need those here too, but don't skimp But whatever you do, don't let them talk too much. And make sure they get to the point, and make sure they're not wasting your time or you're wasting their time, because that's where all the money really stacks up. But these are long-term relationships. These are very important relationships that may last you all the way to a successful exit as well. Anyway, just run your business properly. Just have a proper plan when you go out, set goals, prioritize properly, manage your resources, just run your business properly. But most of all, focus, focus, focus. Don't try to do too many things in too many places. Start in one place. You know who your customers are, who your potential customers are. Just focus on those. Don't get distracted by other opportunities in Latin America, or I really wanted that trip to Hawaii, or California is lovely, but all my customers are over here. Just don't do that. Just focus. And anyway, just marketing execution. There's various strategies for success, but it's just running your business properly. Operational excellence. Getting your branding and marketing right. Customer engagement. Just make sure you got your metrics going. Everything will be okay. So just to wrap up, I asked ChatGPT to take a few points and turn it into a mnemonic so that you can remember. And what is the rule? 7 plus or minus 2 is what your brain can hold. So give it a go. You get the slides if you want. Anyway, so M, you must start with a strong business. Must start from a strong business. There's nothing. The immense is the opportunity. The US market is lucrative and unimaginably big. Strength at home can be translated to strength abroad. Take your strengths and apply them. Seek out the clusters. They are the key to your success and to a successful market launch. Investment, is not just for money, but for the networking connections. Onboard the right people from the right place at the right time or whatever. But just right place, right people, and not your mate. And then navigate difficult terrain with local guides. Don't try to do it alone. Advisors are really important. So with that, this tape will self-destruct about a minute ago. But feel free to get a copy of this presentation by just sending to jvnewton@gmail.com. And there's the QR code. You can get to my LinkedIn, and hopefully we can connect. Or it's actually really simple to remember, because I was really early in LinkedIn. My URL on there is linkedin.in/John. So I hope you learned something. You have your mission in mind, and you remember what mission means. And I hope you have a great time in America. Thank you. Any questions, John? I'll believe there is one question, Leonard.
Yes. Do Americans want to help open source free software developers? How do we get about interesting in decentralized technology?
And this question is about taking open source into America.
Yes.
And Americans do like free things. And just watch any of the programs on television, and there are a million commercials, a lot of them about free things. And nothing is absolutely for free. But I would say, first of all, free as in, free as in freedom, not as in free lunch, is the way that it used to be described. We are seeing more and more large enterprises say, I don't want to be locked into a proprietary platform. I want to be able to make sure that no matter what happens to you, the company, that I am not being locked in, that I can have the freedom to be able to continue using the product, and you can't screw me over. I will pay for support. I want support, I want extra features or whatever, but the core, I don't want to be locked in. I'm tired of Larry Ellison. So that sort of thing is probably the primary reason large enterprises do that. But it's just become more of an ethos as well, that I sort of liken it to the universities are free and open, and a free exchange of ideas. You can see what's actually going on. And leadership is determined by innovation and how fast you move. So just keep innovating and people will continue to come back to you. And Americans know that. I mean, banks are a perfect example. One, they're trying to cut costs, and usually open source is cheaper, but they just want to know what's going on in there. We had Boeing as a customer that they waited forever for Documentum to fix bugs, and they could fix it themselves, but also they need to be able to make sure that the product could be certified in a highly cyber active environment, and they just could not do that with the closed software that they had. The more open software made sure that they could meet their mission requirements as they were starting to build out certain secret projects and stuff. So it's one of the reasons, but it's just it's often a very innovative society as well. Lots of innovation there, and open source often equals innovation.
You go.
Just a question about combined clusters. So we sell inventory management software to SMEs, specifically food and drink, furniture and interiors companies. So how do we go about identifying where they are in the US and where the
Okay, so food and drink. I'm sorry, what kind of software?
Inventory management software.
Inventory management. You'll need to learn to say the word inventory. It's not hard to identify those. It's actually maybe an area where Chicago is a good place to launch. And even Atlanta as well. That's where Coca-Cola is. And so Pepsi, Frito-Lay Pepsi. So Frito-Lay is like Walker's crisps and whatever, it's combined. They also own, I don't think they no longer own restaurants. They spun it out as Yum Brands, so Pizza Hut and stuff like that. But wherever, I don't know where Pepsi is, but wherever Pepsi is, just go there, and there's probably a pretty good cluster of not just the manufacturers, but also the restaurants and everything else that chains that kind of links it together. So you just where your competitors in that space are, where in that case the adjacencies in the food and drink industry is probably the food and drink industry itself. So that's not hard to classify. I think that was on one of my lists on there in terms of where those might be.
Yeah. Question behind?
Yes, can I ask two questions? They're connected. The first one is, would you change anything specifically in reference to, say, SaaS delivery businesses? What you talked about, or would you highlight anything? And the other one is, I guess, one of the things you commonly hear in SaaS businesses is people saying, why don't you just spin up something in Amazon's data center in the US and that'll deal with hosting, with covering the US customers?
Yeah.
I guess what I want to ask is, why is that wrong?
Right. Okay, so SaaS businesses, that's one of those things that I would have thought that, hey, the internet's going to break these clusters, aren't they? Well, whatever it is that the software does still links back to the clusters. So you see a lot of a lot of SaaS companies in the Bay Area, and there's a reason to go to the Bay Area or to Seattle, because of the number of SaaS companies that exist there. So from an operational point of view, you'll get the people you need to be able to run this, but also sales organizations that know how to sell these SaaS offerings as well. If it is industry specific SaaS, I would go where the industry is, the industry that you're selling to. So I've seen SaaS companies literally everywhere. There is dominance, but the dominance is usually consumer oriented. Again, I said, I don't know anything about consumers, but consumers can be anywhere. It's almost like I said, one of those reference abilities is a job. I guess I as a consumer am doing a certain type of job, and so I'm being sold to. It's very horizontal software, so being located there gets a lot of synergies that you wouldn't get elsewhere. But financial services oriented ones are going to be in New York, Boston, you know, maybe Charlotte or something like that. But New York and Boston are pretty good bets for those sorts of things. Or Hartford if it's insurance oriented. So go where those are. In terms of, well, why don't you just spin it up? Well, that's not why people buy SaaS products, is it? They buy SaaS products because they don't want to worry about all that stuff. You know, if you are a large enough enterprise, you might be doing it for cost. The primary reason that people spin up an instance of software to do those sorts of things primarily is security. And usually people have very good reasons to do that. I still think we're probably 60-40, maybe 2/3, 1/3, where 2/3 is on-prem versus SaaS. We're getting to parity, and ultimately it probably will. And the cybersecurity environment will make it so that there's less and less reason to be able to do that. But if you have a SaaS business, it's a growth potential still. And it's also a platform that is much easier to go fast and to innovate fast and make changes constantly. Yeah.
One more question.
So related to that, actually on software as a service, right? So it's exactly that. It is very easy to sort of say, well, we've launched over here. Well, you know, it's a software as a service. We can just go and like we can be up and running in America tomorrow.
Yeah.
So coming back to right to the beginning of your presentation, saying, well, when's the right time to sort of go over? You know, because we could go there tomorrow, but we're going to fail because we don't know the network. We don't know where to be in it.
Yeah.
But when is the right time? Because you also want to take advantage of the opportunities of it, scalability.
Yeah. So, you know, there's many frameworks for well-architected systems, you know, in terms of they can run anywhere. You know, you can, you know, if you have an Amazon account or an Azure account or whatever, you're probably in a position that you can take and make your software work anywhere. And making software is only a small portion of what it takes to run a SaaS company. It takes marketing, it takes sales, it takes you know, just support. It takes all those things that need to be there. And some of those things you can outsource, but a lot of them you can't because of the interpersonal connections that are required. Sales, I can't imagine sales ever being outsourced until it's computers selling to computers. Then it can probably be outsourced. But and to that point, I think you're ready. I would say that, you know, if your differentiation against everything else is absolutely clear, and you've gotten to maybe 5 million in revenue, and you're on a good path, and you just want to take and double, triple, quadruple your market opportunity, I'd start doing the research of, you know, the hypotheticals. First of all, I identify where do I want to go. Once I go in there, who are my competitors, and how well would I do, you know, one-on-one, war game it, you know, how would that play out? Just go through the scenarios. And if you think you'd win, then I think you're in a good position. And check on LinkedIn. It's like, start to hypothetically, what if this person was our head of US operations? By the way, call them VP US, not VP America. America is an ideal, US is a place. You can also call them VP North America, that works. VP Americas sounds kind of wonky. But you know, when you look for that, the hypothetical, if you had that person in place, how much could you sell? How much, you know, what reach could you get? So you just do it that way.